So thank you for joining. We'll get started, and I know everyone who's walking in will make their way in. Thank you for being here. I know it was a very powerful morning service, and we're glad to have 4 panelists who will each speak, and then we'll open up to questions. First, Rabbi Cohen, who will speak about his experience in Charlottesville, Virginia. Rabbi Reis about his experience in Pittsburgh, and then Kelly Fishman and Lisi Shapiro of ADL and AJC, respectively, will share following. So we'll turn it over to Rabbi Cohen. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much. So again, my name is Michael Cohen. I'm a school rabbi down in New Orleans, and my wife is a physician, and that sort of is how I ended up in Charlottesville. We were in Chicago. I was working there for about 6 years. She was finishing her residency. And then she got a fellowship at University of Virginia in Charlottesville. So we moved in the summer. And it was a great welcome to town. We heard the city council had decided. One of the things I noticed when I first went there and toured the city, it's a beautiful town. Anyone here ever been to Charlottesville before? Charlottesville, Virginia? Absolutely gorgeous. It's in the middle of the Shenandoah Mountains, Blue Ridge Mountains. Really very picturesque town. There's a central mall, a pedestrian mall in the center of the town where you see people playing music, and there's all these cool restaurants and shops. Really lovely place. And but if you go one street over, there's a park, and in the middle of the park is this great big tall statue of Robert E. Lee. And then 2 blocks down from that, there was also a statue of Stonewall Jackson. Now, those of you who are familiar with the controversy over monuments that came up relatively recently, know that these statues were not built, right after the Civil War. They were built at the height of the Jim Crow era. And they were sort of a sign of white supremacy to just sort of, make a value statement for anyone of color who happened to be walking around, of which there are many people in Charlottesville. And so the city council decided to take this statue down. Said it doesn't stand for us who we are anymore. It's offensive. And there's this guy, Richard Spencer, I believe is his name. And he had decided, he was an alumnus of Charlottesville, of UVA, and he decided he wanted this to be a rallying point around this cultural issue. So he summoned all of his Nazi friends, and they held what was called the Unite the Right rally. Now, we had heard about this leading up to the event, that it was coming, and we'd even heard some people who decided that they were going to get out of town. I think I lacked some imagination about what was going to happen. So we decided, you know what, they're going to hold this rally in the park, which was about 3 blocks away from my house, where we were living. And we had this custom where we would walk around on Shabbat mornings. I had a young daughter at the time. She's still young, but she's not as young as she was. And we'd walk around and we'd, listen to the music, and we'd have our Shabbat walk and everything. So we thought, you know what, we'll just do it early before the rally is supposed to start. And that way we can be home in time for any trouble. Well, it turns out that people are anti-Semites are early risers. Already by the time we were walking around, we realized that things were very different from what we anticipated. Walking up and down this mall, there were state troopers walking in formation. We also started to see people dressed unusually walking towards the park. I saw a group of people dressed all in black, carrying a black flag. I later found out that was sort of Antifa signage or something. We started to hear the rally because there was something happening. And we started walking over. I was with my family, and I was kind of curious. I wanted to check it out for myself because, to be honest, I'd never met a Nazi before. And I was wondering, who are these people? Right? The night before, they had walked around with tiki torches, done this promenade down UVA campus, chanting, "The Jews will not replace us." And I'm like, what makes you think I want your life? I don't, I don't understand who you are or what you think I am, you know? So what we do is we start walking down a little bit, and then there's this person wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. She walks up to us. She sees that we have a little girl with us, and she said, you guys need to turn around. There are people with assault rifles over there. It's not safe. She was right. So we go back home. And then messages start to pour in that something's happened. First, we get a message that somebody died. Then we found out a little bit later that up to 3 people died. And that it wasn't safe to leave the house. We need to shelter in place. And there we were. We're sitting with a neighbor who we hardly knew. But it was important to be together during that time. So we sat down, we had some cake, we read a book over and over again to my 2-year-old daughter. And a little bit later, I don't know if it was the next day or that day, I honestly don't remember. But I walked out and I saw what had happened. This was on my street. I lived on 4th Street. And I saw that there was a lot of yellow tape and police cars and all sorts of other stuff. And I found out later that what had happened was there was a group of counter-protesters who were walking down the street. And then this guy decided to ram them with his Dodge Challenger. And he sort of hit the accelerator as hard as he could right into this crowd of people. And one person died. Her name was Heather Heyer. And 15, 20 people were injured. You know, it's not just a little thing to be injured, right? You know, broken legs, broken arms, you know, people not being able to walk, that sort of thing. And suddenly I found that my street, a block away from my house, was the center of national news. I read this post that I wrote right afterwards that reminded me of all these details. And one of the things I wrote was that I lived in Jerusalem in the height of the Intifada. And I never had been closer to a terrorist attack my whole life. This was a shock for me. And it was right along the way I would walk my daughter to school every day. I would walk past it every single day. And the reaction that the local town had was that site became a memorial. And people took these chalk markers and they wrote on the walls, you know, all sorts of different messages. And they closed down the street. And it was like that for about a year. The street was closed until finally they tried to figure out what to do. And they decided to rename the street and to reopen it. And it was very strange for me the first time I drove down it. Just thinking about, you know, it was a very surreal experience. I would say that the community, the Jewish community, very much came together after that. They had canceled Shabbat services that morning, wisely. But afterwards, there was a couple of days later, the whole Jewish community gathered in the synagogue. And the president of Reform Judaism's Reform Synagogue, Rick Jacobs, came out and made a special trip to make sure that we felt supported. And we did feel supported. And it was nice, but we were not okay. And, you know, that's the unfortunate legacy about these things. I mean, years later, you know. Just a coda to the episode. For a long time, they actually just covered the statue in a plastic bag, in a big garbage bag. The reason behind that was because people were covered in graffiti. And so while they were waiting for the courts to play out what they could actually do with this statue, the in-between solution was essentially to mask it so that you couldn't deface it, but you also didn't have to look at it. Eventually, they got permission to take away the statue, and it just popped up into national news this week. I don't know if you've seen it. I would encourage you to look this up after Shabbat, to go onto the Washington Post. They have this special interactive article showcasing the fate of this statue. What happened is that there's this group called Swords into Plowshares, and they essentially came into custody of the statue, and they eventually decided that what they were going to do was melt it down And then they are going to have an art competition to repurpose this metal into something new. And so you can actually see this racist monument being cut piece to piece and melted down and turned into whatever the future will be for this particular statue. And I look forward to taking any questions you might have after the presentation panel. Rabbi Reis.
Thank you, Rabbi Cohen. So my story probably starts 10 years before I'm born. My father, Zichrono Livracha, my father, my teacher, Rabbi Paul Reis, was a rabbi in Pittsburgh. He actually, before that, was a rabbi. He was the Hillel rabbi at WVU in Morgantown, West Virginia, and he loved the area. He moved into the area, and he was the rabbi at 2 synagogues in Pittsburgh. He was at Beth Shalom, which is the big synagogue there. He was assistant rabbi, and he was the rabbi at New Light, which at that point had its own building. If you just went down around the corner, Pittsburgh is a town where, like in a good way, there's certain things that are unchanged from Pittsburgh. It was a town of Achdut before, it was a town of Jewish unity before, and it still remains, it's probably stronger now as a town of Jewish unity. So my father was the rabbi at this synagogue, New Light. And it gets a little bit less press because they're a little bit quieter of a community than I think the other, than Tree of Life was, and they were renting the space eventually when we get to the story of actually that day. So my father's the rabbi of this synagogue. My brothers grew up in this synagogue. They love it. They enjoy it. They have fond memories. It was this old towny type community that was very, very Hamish, very, very welcoming, smaller synagogue in contrast to the bigger synagogues. The sanctuary doubled as a social hall type place. You'd roll up the chairs for 10 minutes, and then you would get your tables, and that's where you would eat, is right at the sanctuary. Very, very lovely community. After the year before I'm born, my father actually gets a job in Flint, Michigan. So we pack on up, we moved to Flint, Michigan, and I'm born in Flint, Michigan. My father's the rabbi there for 13 years. When he passes away, my mother's like, where should we go? We're not going to stay in Flint. I think it was a wise choice not to stay in Flint. And her instinct is, we still have good connections. We're going to move back to Pittsburgh. And we do move back to Pittsburgh. We live in Pittsburgh. Throughout my high school years, I live in Pittsburgh. And I really become who I am, I think, in a lot of ways, from my experience in Pittsburgh, from the Achdut, from the feeling of connection between Jews in Pittsburgh, from the fact that, I'm someone who's very proudly Shomer Shabbat, and in Pittsburgh, it'd be counterintuitive not to be Shomer Shabbat in some ways. If you were to drive to the shul, you would park further away from your house to get the parking to then get to shul. So it made no sense. Of course you walked, not because of Shomer Shabbat, but because that's the way you go. And actually, I'll give you the story of Achdut. We moved to Pittsburgh. My mom wanted us to be in Beth Shalom because there was a big synagogue. There would be other people who are young. That was the year after Beth Shalom's fire. I don't know if you guys know. You're not so far away, but Beth Shalom had this massive fire, and they had to renovate the entire building. And Tree of Life, actually, who was down the road, the older brother, the old-time synagogue, said to them, "You're a bigger synagogue than us. Why don't you take our main sanctuary?" Right? And so my first weekend, my first Shabbat at Beth Shalom was actually a Tree of Life, right? And I mean, one of the most powerful memories, it really doesn't deal with this, but one of the most powerful memories that I knew I was home in Pittsburgh was I walked into shul, went to davening, I went to Kiddush, and Cantor Tabeh, who was like the staple of Beth Shalom, he was this old cantor who was a Schindler Jew. He survived the Holocaust because of Oscar Schindler. He comes up to me, he says, "You're Paul's son." And I say, "Yeah, I'm Paul's son." He goes, "I miss your dad a lot." And it was like the epitome of feeling like I'm home. And that's where I'm safe. Which was very important for a 13-year-old boy. So I move on with my life. Life goes on. I go on to college. I go off to New York. I go to rabbinical school. I live my life. My mom still, for many years, was in Pittsburgh until, unfortunately, she passed away about 10 years back. but she was the executive director at a Reform synagogue in town. We were very in the community, and I'm sitting at my Shabbat table on Parshat Chayei Sarah 5 years ago, and a neighbor comes in who is part of the like the Hatzalah, like the ambulance crew, and says, I have my walkie-talkie on. Did you hear what happened in Pittsburgh? Now, I'll pause and say, my brother loves this shul so much, he's still a member at New Light. And I realize I skipped an important piece here. New Light, the year before this story happens, decides to sell their building to Chabad. Chabad now owns that building, and they move into the basement at Tree of Life. And so the neighbor comes and says, there's been a shooting in Pittsburgh. Now, again, I'm very concerned about my Shomer Shabbat lifestyle. I am freaking out. My brother's a board member at New Light. As a board member at one of these shuls, he might be there, right? So I first time in 15 years, pull up my phone, check it out, and say, Ezra, are you okay? To which he said, I'm in a fight with a shul. I haven't been at shul for a few weeks. Which, I've never been so happy that he was a stubborn person. I put my phone away. My mind is in a different place, right? Like, these are the people that know me, that I know, and they're in trauma. And I think about down the road for me are the Kiselevs, who actually, this is the people that I'm really going to end up helping, because Beth Kiselev, their daughter, is married to Rabbi Perlman, who's the rabbi at New Light. Now, while I'm having this conversation, he's being saved, right? And I want you to, it's not my story to share, but I will share just briefly about it, where he's in and why I was asked to come in. He's a real hero of that day that I really, really, really think, because of his humility of more than anything else, we don't know his story as much. He was on the bima, right? They were in the basement. They had their little kitchenette over on the left side. They had a boiler room closet on the right side. And he's on the bima, and he hears the sounds going on from upstairs. He grabs as many people as possible and runs into the closet. And the hardest part of this story that he struggled with, and I saw him struggle with, and that my brother, when we'll get back to my brother a little bit in the connection, struggled with, was there was this old man. And every shul has this old man who is grumpy and always a little angry, and his hearing aid doesn't quite work. He's not really listening to things. He's one of those people that gets pulled in. His name is Mel Wax. Yeah. And Mel is so confused. He doesn't know what's going on. He didn't hear the shots. All he knows is someone pulled him in. And he's like, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? He opens the door to go outside. Unfortunately, the shooter sees him, and he's shot and he falls back into the room, and they're hiding in the dark in that room with Mel. That is the experience that Rabbi Perlman is dealing with, as well as being the rabbi for his community, as well as now having, after this moment, to go and bury his friends. Right? Rabbis, we try as much as possible to share in your simchas and your sorrows, to try to be there with you in that moment and to absorb some of those feelings. And I don't know how he was able to go through all those funerals with the feelings that he was feeling, right? That I've spoken to him about it, where his feeling through that whole time was, why couldn't I save him too? And so Sunday moves around, these funerals are happening, Monday is going on, and I get a call on Tuesday from a family friend from the Macklers, who's Rabbi Mackler is also a rabbi in the community, and says, I live next to the Perlmans, he's not doing well, can you come in and just be his assistant for the week? I also, like the ambulance worker, I once upon a time was a volunteer on an ambulance. When you have that instinct, you run in and you do the work. So that's what I did. I came in and I went with him, and I went to the meetings with the community, and I talked to people, and I called up congregants just to see how they were. I drove him from place to place because he was not in a place to be driving from house to house at that point. And I sat at Shiva houses, and I was there with that community right? And sometimes I was a security blanket. I was Paul's son, and it was nice to see Paul's son again and be back with this person that was part of the family, because the New Light really feels like a family. And I just want to share a few reflections of some really big moments that I think happened, where I get off the plane and we go down to the JCC. We go in the basement of the JCC, and I think it was the JCC, and we're meeting with the Israeli trauma team. They had flown in to help us deal with the situation. And as we're having this conversation, someone gets a phone call and hears, and in light of what's going on in the world, it's even more amazing, I think, from the Muslim community of Pittsburgh. They would like to make a human chain around the synagogue on Shabbat. On Shabbat, we're going to have all the conservative community is going to be together, davening together, and the Muslim community wants to make a chain to say that we are there to hug you. We are there to be there for you, and that no one should cross our line. Again, reminds me of my Kristallnacht story I told you earlier, right? This was their statement. Unfortunately, we had to tell them, it's not safe for you to do that. The FBI said, we can't let you do that. But it was a really powerful moment to see that we were not alone. And the second moment happens on Shabbat. We're together on Shabbat. It's packed like Bet Shalom is actually never packed. The house is full with people. In both the balcony is full, the main floor is full. There is no space, standing room only, right? Bougie Herzog is speaking to the community. And we finish davening, and we come down there, and the members of Shomrei Torah, of PZ, all these synagogues, all the Orthodox synagogues, are already in the ballroom. Because they said, you shouldn't be here alone. We are one family, we are one community, and we mourn together. We're one people. And the idea that, again, we sat there at Kiddush, the entire Jewish community, not just the conservative Jews, not just the Reformed Jews, everybody together, we sat together, was really an impactful moment of reminding us that, sadly, sometimes it takes these things to remind us of this, and we're seeing this right now, but we are one people and we care for each other.
How to turn it on? Is it on? It's on. Am I okay if I sit? Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Shabbat Shalom. My name is Lisi Shapiro. I'm the Regional Director of AJC Cleveland and a proud member of this shul. It's nice to see all of you. I'm honored to be here today with our esteemed guests and my colleague and friend, Kelly Fishman from the ADL. We have the responsibility now, after we've heard from Hadass and after we've heard from the rabbis, to talk about a little bit about what we're doing to combat anti-Semitism locally. But I want to first say that when I moved to Cleveland, I worked for a company who was headquartered in Charlottesville, Virginia. And so I walked those streets. And on the night of Charlottesville, I could feel myself being there. And this past summer, I had the opportunity to go into the Tree of Life Synagogue. I was in that closet. I was in that cafeteria area, that kitchen area. I walked into the sanctuary with bullet holes, and I was in a very familiar place. It felt like home, and you could feel the pain and the fear of that Shabbat morning. And it was an incredibly powerful moment. If you have not seen the movie, which is out now, I think PBS is showing it, and I believe it's in theaters, calling Repair the World, Stories from Pittsburgh, it talks about how that community came together after this violence and after this anti-Semitic attack. And it's beautiful. We just did a screening of it, and we did the screening after October 7th, and it had a different feeling for us. Because so many of us, Kelly and I are in this work. We do bridge building every day. We've been doing it for years. We have friends in the interfaith and intergroup of Cleveland who have called us and have stood by us, and we know that not everybody has that. And there are a lot of people who are feeling fearful now and alone now. But we do have community, and we are building community. Just a little bit, AJC is the global advocacy organization for the Jewish people. With offices here and around the globe, we work to combat anti-Semitism and all hate, to secure Israel's place in the world, and defend and promote democracy and pluralism. So as we gather here this morning on the anniversary, this 85th anniversary of Kristallnacht, it comes shortly after that 5th anniversary of Pittsburgh. And now, just a little over a month after we faced the brutal attack by Hamas, the terrorist organization backed by Iran, in the worst attack on the Jewish community since the Holocaust. As a community, we know anti-Semitism, we know hatred, we know violence, and after listening to Hadass, we know we are resilient. We know that we are resilient. So, as we heard from our guests, Charlottesville and Tree of Life were the clarion call for American Jews that anti-Semitism was not something that was just in Europe. It was here on our shores, and we needed to do something about it and deal with it. Both of our organizations have been working on this for many, many years, but this was that clarion call to come together. You may remember in Cleveland, right after Pittsburgh, we had the most amazing vigil at the JCC. And if you were there, you remember the stage was filled, not with the Jewish community, but with our interfaith and intergroup partners who desperately wanted to be there for us. At the vigil that we had on after October 7th, many of those same people were with us in the parking lot at the Federation. We are not alone, although it sometimes feels that way. So after Charlottesville and Pittsburgh, we knew that anti-Semitism was coming at us from every direction. It was coming from the far left, it was coming from the far right, it was coming from people acting out of extreme religious views, and most of all, it was coming from ignorance. Since that time, our organizations have been bringing our own and our collective strengths to this fight. We advocate. So after Heather Heyer's death, there is the can never pronounce the second name, Heyer Jabir, No Hate Act, which we worked together on collectively to have passed. Now we have to work on getting hate crimes reported and reported correctly, but that act was passed. We've been working on the passage of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. Our governor issued an executive order against anti-Semitism. We've worked diligently to inform and educate. We work with our elected leaders, we work with civic leaders, we do training. So AJC did a anti-Semitism training for a bipartisan delegation of Ohio House of Representatives delegation that was called together by Greg Landsman, a Jewish freshman from Cincinnati, and Max Miller, a Jewish freshman from Cleveland area. We've done it for the Cavaliers. We've done it for the entire NBA. We've done it at churches, at nonprofits, really across the spectrum. We've collaborated together when, don't you just wish that's all we were talking about was a Nazi play on a football game in Beechwood? So we have a relationship with the Catholic Diocese. Kelly has one with Orange Schools, and together we have worked on both of these issues to inform and to educate. This past summer, the president announced a national strategy to confront anti-Semitism. Both of our organizations were at the table. Much of the national strategy came from AJC's call to action. A member here, Mike Milgram, is the chair of our local task force. And what we thought prior to October 7th was we were going out and educating on this. And we were working to make sure that all 200 action items from that plan were being implemented. And as you might imagine, since October 7th, our worlds have changed. Our work has dramatically increased, not only as Israel advocates, but in combating an unprecedented rise in anti-Semitism. In a moment, Kelly's going to tell you those startling statistics. In just the past month, we have seen the anti-Semitism from the left, so the anti-Zionism as anti-Israelism as anti-Semitism, and what we know from the right, have sort of coalesced in their virulent hatred. We have seen that anti-Zionism cross, and if there's time later, we're happy to explain some of the terms that are being used and how you can work against it. We've seen the hatred in the workplace, we've seen it online, and as most of you know, we have seen it on college campuses. We're lucky here that we're working with a chancellor and a governor who are really forcefully enforcing the rules and regulations. But as many of you know, there was an incident this week at Kent and at OSU, and we're working on those. So the work continues with elected officials, it continues with university presidents, Hillel, the chancellor, the diplomatic corps, social media, with our allies, and within our own community, working with parents in particular. There are lots of resources. I know that you have them, we have them. HAC.org is filled with them. So Kelly's going to speak, and then I think we have a couple of action items for you in the ways in which you can help us continue the fight against anti-Semitism.
Thanks, Lacey. I'm going to stand up so you can see me. Also, I was a teacher for a very long time. I promise there won't be homework, but I'm going to try really hard to stand still because I really like to move around. I'm Kelly Fishman. I'm the regional director for the Anti-Defamation League, and we actually cover 4 states. So we cover Ohio, the western half of Pennsylvania, Kentucky, and West Virginia. Unfortunately, since October 7th, we've seen a nearly 400% increase in anti-Semitism. And we're seeing those impacts right here in Ohio with over 20 incidents that were reported to us, things that are as small as flyering, but as large as assault. And so we're working really closely with our elected officials, with our partners at the Federation, at AJC, at Ohio Jewish Communities to really make sure that we're coalescing everyone, that we're using those relationships that we have in the interfaith community, across different disciplines, working closely with college campuses to make sure our students feel safe. A couple of weeks ago, I was at Miami University in Oxford, and things have been relatively quiet there, and I had the opportunity to speak with the students at Hillel. And what was really fantastic about that experience is that they want to learn how to do more, how to have conscientious and constructive dialogue with their peers. Because that's what we want for our college students, right? We want our kids to go and learn how to talk with people who might have different opinions than they do, to share in community, and to figure out, when we go out into the world, we do not all agree on everything, unfortunately. But teaching our kids how to have constructive and conscientious conversations, they said, there are some students from SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, a student group on campuses, and I just don't think they understand where we're coming from, and it's so frustrating, and this has happened. And one of the professors there, who's Jewish, and teaches in the religious studies department, said, actually, one of the things that I do is I meet with groups who have different opinions, and I bring them together and use restorative justice practices to help them learn how to understand someone else's perspective. And the students were so excited to have these opportunities after I left, to be able to try to bring peers together, people they knew, people they were sitting next to in class, to have conversations, to understand, we clearly don't understand one another. I want to know more about why you feel this way. And I want to share my experiences and why I feel this way. And when I left, they felt so empowered by the action items that we had, the resources we had, and then this professor right there on campus who was willing to sit down and share in those conversations with them. Because what I am seeing is fear fueling fear and hate fueling hate. We see it on social media, we hear it in the way people talk, we see it on the news. How do we step back and pause to not let fear fuel us or hate fuel us? How do we have conversations with the people that we know? Those one-on-one conversations that say, you know what, I think we're seeing this differently, and I'd really love to understand more about that. This was a big wake-up call, I know, for me and maybe other people when friends I knew, people that I follow on social media, all of a sudden started having very different opinions than I did after October 7th. People I thought, oh, we're on the same page. We agree about everything, right? Our politics align, our ideas align. And all of a sudden, after October 7th, that felt very different. And it didn't feel so good. And I realized, you know what? I need to have some of these conversations. How can I sit down and learn more about what this person is feeling and thinking, share what I'm feeling and thinking, and see if we can come to some common ground. I also had the opportunity to speak with Channel 3, WKYC here in Cleveland. A couple weeks, maybe a week and a half after October 7th, they called me and they said, we need to know how to report on what's happening without moving into anti-Semitism. So I met with all the reporters, producers, digital content managers, marketing people. We all came together. I did a lunch and learn. I had to start it by saying, this is off the record. I don't usually have to do that, but it's the news. So we brought them all together, and I shared the history of the Levant region. I shared the history of the Jewish people. And then we moved into the tropes and stereotypes that have been perpetuated throughout history, and all of a sudden people were like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this, and oh, this makes sense, and could we talk about it this way? And they were asking questions, and Jewish and non-Jewish members both of staff were coming together and sharing experiences and learning in dialogue how to have conversations about what was happening in a way that they felt was in service to all the people that are impacted, because we know Muslims, Palestinians, Jews, Israelis are all being impacted. And they wanted to be able to have those conversations in a way that were still true and honest to the Jewish people. And I think when we can have those conversations and we can bring people together in dialogue, like we saw after Charlottesville, like we saw after Pittsburgh, like we see now, when we come together and stand in solidarity, we can fight hate for good together. And I think that's so important. So a couple of the action items I'm going to share, and Lisa has a couple as well. We do have a new hotline for college students. It's called CALL, C-A-L-L. If you just Google ADL CALL, you'll be able to find the website. It is a pro bono legal service for students and professors on college campuses who have experienced anti-Semitism. We have James Pash. Many of you know he was the regional director before I was and is now our senior director of national litigation. On Thursday this week, trained 50 lawyers already to be operating the CALL hotline. We're getting calls, a couple come in every hour from students on different campuses, and that's for across the country, but trying to give those resources out for students or professors on campus who are struggling. It's a great resource to share with anyone you know who might have someone on a college campus. And then our ADL Stand With Israel site has a lot of amazing resources, ways you can reach out to elected officials, ways you can maybe reach out to your own alma mater if you feel like your own alma mater is maybe not standing up to anti-Semitism the way you'd like them to. And then resources about, again, how to have conscientious conversations. There's a great resource called their Table Talks. How do I talk with my young kids about what's going on. And it gives a lot of guidance for how to have those conversations. So I want to pass it to Lisi so that she can also share the resources and actions items they have.
Thanks, Kelly. I was with a board member last night. How many of you remember after George Floyd, you didn't really know what to say to your African American friends and coworkers? You wanted to say something, you weren't sure what to say. Well, what we've learned is that in some of these cases where people have not made those calls, that they're actually waiting for us as much as we don't want to make those calls. We would much rather have people, right, stand with us because they want to. And after all, how hard is it to call out a terrorist attack? But that sometimes when you reach out and say, I'm hurting, this is the way I'm feeling, I'd love to talk to you, you will find that there are people who want to have those conversations with you. Next week is going to be a nationwide Unity Shabbat, and our two organizations, along with federations, are doing this. AJC resources will be available. The ADL Table Talk will be available. We're asking you to light that third Shabbat candle for those who cannot, and a memorial candle. And we know that there are many ways to do action items and action alerts, and we have a Stand With Israel action alert as well. But we have also learned over many, many years that it's really important for constituents to call their own representatives. So please call them. Ask them to stand up to rising anti-Semitism. Ask them to stand up for Israel now more than ever. And you want to do that frequently. Don't make calls to every single representative. Call yours, because they're going to ask you, and that's what's going to be counted. And again, on the AJC website, there is an unbelievable amount of really phenomenal resources. How do you answer these tropes when someone says, from the river to the sea, colonialization, the history, so that when you're having conversations, you will feel more comfortable having them. And we are only going to fight this hate and continue our resilience when we do this together and we do it effectively. Cleveland is a model. Our organizations have worked cooperatively for years. It's been demanded of us by our lay leaders and by this community. And now, all across the country, this is happening. So we're in great shape because we know and like each other. So, Rabbi Foster?
Oh. Yeah, first, thank you. Thank you all for your words this afternoon. We want to open it up to any questions. Yeah.
So I wanted to know if those community members who are not Jews, but who we've supported in times of discomfort and as you were talking about, if any of them are going to the rally, have they secured a bus? Do we know anything if they're coming to join us the way we've joined them?
So Nancy, I don't know about the Washington March. I can't tell you that they are. I do know that my guess would be that those that are closer to DC, that there will be. I know there's a huge evangelical university that is bringing lots of busloads because I heard about that. I would imagine that those who are close by are. I do know that our friends here, if you look at the cooperative ad that was placed in the CJN and in the Plain Dealer, and you look at the list, you will see many of our partners have been there. And it's been across the board. It has been our African American friends, it's been our Hispanic friends, it's been our corporate friends, it's been our interfaith friends. And they have been at our rallies here. So I can't speak to Washington.
Ali, at the end, you mentioned about we should be contacting our representatives on all levels. I have a concern about our representative here, Chantel Brown, who represents a large swath of the Jewish community. Has there been any effort to contact her to see what her support should be? And because in the past, I believe she has not been very supportive.
She's been incredibly supportive. She made really great statements. She's voted in support. So I will tell you that their offices are getting calls much more from another community than from ours, and they need to hear from us. But she has been incredibly strong. She spoke at the first vigil. Her people have been there. If you look at her website, you will see a terrific statement that she made. But I would urge you to call. And when you call, don't be combative, because it's an intern or a staffer, and they are hearing horrible things from lots of people. So I would say that when you call, I know this sounds really stupid to say to somebody, but say, hi. You know, don't just launch in and yell. Just say, I'm one of your constituents. I appreciate what you have done so far. We need you to continue to stand on this.
Have you had colleagues in the Muslim community call you and show support and say that, you know, that we're not terrorists? How can we be supportive?
Yeah, I'll just repeat because I'm not sure everyone heard. But the question was, have you had colleagues in the Muslim community call to share their support and that they're not they're not terrorists and asking what they can do?
Yeah, our across the interfaith community, we're having people reach out both here and around the U.S. And I think that's been really important because we've also seen a rise in Islamophobia and anti-Muslim violence. So that community is also suffering because many of, just as the Jewish people have many stereotypes and tropes that they must fight against, so does the Muslim community. And so I know many of my board members work very closely with our interfaith partners. We have something called the Multi-Faith Neighbors Network that's part of something that we do at ADL, where we work across those communities as well. So we are very fortunate to have these communities still coming together, and we're really continuing to try to make sure people understand that when we say stand with Israel, that does not mean we stand against people who are Palestinian, people who are Muslim. We stand against Hamas, but we want everyone to be able to live safely and freely. And so I think because that has been our message for a long time, it has then really helped as we come together as a community. Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Thanks for your comments. First of all, I would like to say something. You talked about the Warsaw Ghetto. And I was about 8 years old when I saw on the Polish side, I didn't know what it was. I was standing next to the wall, and I saw flames, and that was when the ghetto was burning. I just want to make a comment on that. So many our anchor people like CNBC and CNN and Fox, but mostly we were stuck watching CNBC because I never used to watch that channel, but they were really all the way with what happened in Israel. And so we appreciated that, and their anchor people that were CNN and in Israel and always talking about, you know, what they saw, which was really heartwarming to know that they're with us. But then lately, this week or last week, I see people coming out on those shows being interviewed, like the Queen of George Morgan. Right. And, you know, and nobody interrupts her. Nobody said something contrary to what she's saying, only what we're doing to the people in yeah, I'm sorry. I'm a little bit upset when I talk about it, but we watch I-24 news constantly, 24 hours a day. and JBS as well. But yesterday I was also upset because there was a woman, I don't know where she was from, India or whatever, and she was crying at the plight of the people in Gaza. And she did not interrupt her and say, well, what about the massacre that happened? So why are they sometimes just so one-sided? When in the beginning, that's all they talked about is what happened to the Israelis.
I will say, this is not research backed. This is my opinion. I think it is because people don't know how to follow the nuances of what's happening. People don't understand or struggle to have a conversation about maybe being upset with the Israeli government and the choices the government's making, and separating that from all Israelis and all Jews. Just as any of us in the United States would never want to be aligned with every single choice every president we've ever had has made, right? None of us want that, regardless of where we fall on the political spectrum. And I think that's what's happening with Israel, is that there are people who are upset with the choices that the government is making, but blaming it on all Israelis and all Jews. No one wants to see the destruction of innocent lives wherever they are. And we're not having a conversation about the nuances of that.
Who started this?
Well, right, but I think it's such a long history, and we're not having those conversations, right? There's so much involved in what's happening, and it's a news event.
So I'm going to disagree a little bit. And for those of you who know me in the room, you know that I was a journalist for a long time before coming into this work. I think you've seen better coverage of this than you've seen of anything else. There is an education. Oh, I'm so glad Bob is shaking his head. He knows. Bob Jacob is in the room, the editor of the CJN. I think that I'm a CNN girl just because I've worked with them before. When you've seen their anchors, they have been telling both sides of that story over and over and over again. The same is happening across the board. There has been an education, and it goes on. And our organizations are helping to provide experts, resources, and understandings. Is it perfect? No. But we are hearing more of the story, and when it is not being told correctly, they are hearing about it, and there's more correction of it. I'm almost more worried about what we're seeing on social media, because we know that we don't want to, you don't want to respond to people that you don't know on social media. By the way, social media tip that you didn't ask for: if you see something on your feed you don't like and it's from someone you don't know, don't argue about it. Don't answer. It's, first of all, it's going to fill your feed with all of that, a lot more of it, but also you can't win it. And if it's someone you know, don't do it online.
Right. I would just add, I think what you're speaking about is about the nuance piece that I think is so difficult in our world. Our world is anti-nuance in a lot of ways, and social media is certainly that. I mean, again, I would echo, like, none of us want plague for any person. We don't want anybody to die. We probably have disagreements about, like with the person that's being interviewed, about what the cause of that plight is, right? But that's more nuance that I think our world often wants to have, and I think that we just need to be like aware of the fact that we're fighting an uphill battle where people don't want to hear the nuance.
Yeah, the fact that they came to Kelly to learn more, it is amazing.
Good. I see Harry, Abraham, then Rabbi Latovsky, and then
Can I say something?
so let's move. We'll come around here. Harry? Yeah.
You know, one of the things that is always forgotten is the famous words of Santayana: "He who forgets the past is doomed to repeat it."
Yeah.
And back then, at Kristallnacht, the world did not, including the United States, want to receive immigrants from the countries. The bigger question that I have right now is what are you doing relative to what happened in Los Angeles, where, what's his name, Kessler? Was murdered, I guess. And not one word have I heard from any of the Jewish communities. No uprising, no walks, no talks. When you have one person probably getting just hurt in the black community or Muslim, you probably have 10 million people out there.
I don't mean to disagree with you, but there was quite a bit of talk, outrage, law enforcement from the Jewish community. I know both of our
How many
organizations
people?
spoke
How many
out about
people?
it.
How many people were there walking?
I don't know if there was a rally or not. I don't know. I know
I know that there was some commentaries, very small commentary.
I'm not
I
so sure
didn't
it was
see the
that small.
volume of people out there talking, especially in the Jewish community. Every synagogue should have been talking about it.
And they were. They literally, they were.
But if you're not familiar, you can look on the news later. I think, right, it could be an open question, whether more could be done, but there were, I know ADL and AJC did speak about it. Yeah, Rabbi Latovsky, then Leonard, then Helena, yeah.
Just a comment, there's a reason it's called news. History is not our strength. And one of the problems that Israel has had in recent decades, really, is that what you see on the headlines is not in favor of Israel. Israel is strong, has tanks, and the poor Palestinians only have rocks. Of course, now they have more, a lot more, and it's a lot more dangerous. But anyhow, that's an issue that's not going to go away. And people aren't interested in nuances or history. They see on the TV. I want to know how many visions did you have, if you're old enough, of Dresden when the Allies bombed it to pieces. War is ugly. Lots of innocent people get killed in war. How many people rose up against America because we were dropping an atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? And hundreds of thousands of people were killed. Innocent people. Who raised the issue then? Nobody. But now we've got a real problem, and there's no way to stop it. You see on TV all these people, poor people being brought to hospitals and all that other stuff. What we heard in the synagogue, you won't see that on TV. You won't hear that on TV. That's not new. That happened a month ago. We still feel it, but the world doesn't. You have to take all of that into account because there's no way around it. That's what we're dealing with.
You want to find a way around it. Thank you. Leonard and then Helena and then.
I have a more narrowly focused question regarding what's happening on campuses. And specifically, if or was there any involvement on your guys' part with the banning of SJP at Brandeis and in the state schools in Florida? And if so, and if not, why?
Yes, so that was something that ADL worked on with Brandeis Center. We called for campuses to investigate SJP chapters because they could be in violation of the code of conduct for groups on campus. And then said, if they are in violation, we ask that you sanction them or, follow the school handbook for those violations. There have been places where that's happened and things may have gotten worse because, obviously, SJP is a group of students who are frustrated and upset for the opposite reasons that we are frustrated and upset. Mm-hmm. And so we have worked really hard to do that. We have a letter out to campus administrators asking them, one, to fight anti-Semitism on campus, and then to make sure Jewish students feel safe on campus. And part of that is looking into any violations that SJP chapters might have had.
Columbia kicked them out.
Oh yeah, Columbia just banned them for the rest of the semester. So it's happening, as universities start to investigate. I'm going to be interested to see what happens with Ohio State because everything that's literally just been happening over the last 48 hours is something we're working on closely. And then the Brandeis Center is actually part of the call hotline with us for Jewish students on campus.
Thank you, Adina, and then Helena and then Adina.
Hi, thank you. I have a few things and I have a few perspectives. Since I'm an Israeli, born in the DP camp to Holocaust survivors, I have a different view of most Americans in this country, which lived in relative security for many years and were not exposed to this kind of raising anti-Semitism everywhere, every day of their life. I want just to add, what about MIT, which happened recently also? Israeli and Jewish students cannot get into that's exactly how it started in 1933. The Jews were not allowed to study, were not allowed to get an education, couldn't get into the main thing. Wake up, guys. This is coming all over again, and no one is saying anything. So many, excuse me, I don't want any applause. It's not a time to applaud. Yeah. So many, hundreds of thousands of Arabs were killed by Arabs. Did anybody say something in the world about it? Where are you, all the humanitarians? You know what? I don't want to say bad words, but this is really unbelievable. But if Israel retaliates for 1,400, what about all the children kidnapped? Nobody is saying anything about it. People are tearing their photos of the kidnaps from the walls that we put them on. Nobody is saying anything. People are not doing enough to call. I get up in the minyan and I say, call your constituents. Do something. For every letter that we write, there are 600 of them that write against us. Whom do you think the politician will listen to? Us? Nobody will listen to us. My mother, who was a Holocaust survivor, who lost 65 people of her close family. Brothers, sisters, parents, nieces, nephews. They were all butchered in Ghetto Lodge and in Auschwitz. She survived somehow. There are good people and bad people, I don't say, in every religion. And I want just to add a few things about being there. I brought my children here to have a better life, to try and avoid the daily, literally daily. What Hadass was talking today, I experienced for 35 years of my life, day in and day out, because I'm an anesthesiologist and intensive care. And my husband was in the Air Force, so we saw it every single day. We brought him here to get him a better life, not to be exposed. We didn't do a good education in the 85 years since Kristallnacht. If children in the universities are getting harassed, what's going on? Wake up. Another thing, my son was in the Tree of Life. And that was when I was still working full-time, and it was a Shabbat. And I was at home, and one of my friends called me, because she knew that my son lives in Pittsburgh, and he belonged to that synagogue. And she called, did you hear what happened? By that, I tried to call my son. He didn't pick up the phone. the hours that went through, what I went through, he had 2 small girls, okay? A wife and him. And they always went there. Lucky there is a God, because that Shabbat was nothing for the children. So there were no children in that synagogue in that day, or on this day. Until I heard that they are alive, and he said there was nothing, so we didn't go. I thought I'm dying, okay? Because I brought them here. At least in Israel, we are fighting for our country and our place. No one thought that it will be able to happen here. On another note, a little bit of hopefulness. Through it happened, I had some of my, and I worked in St. Vincent Charity, so it was a totally Catholic place. Some of the nuns called me, some of my colleagues, which most of them, I was the only Jew there. Some of them called to tell me how sorry they are. But after the first week, total silence. They have a short memory.
Thank you, Helena. We feel and share your pain. And thank ADL and AJC for all the work you're doing. I don't know if anyone wants to comment here, but we hear you and hear your, Adina, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you and not make a lot of commentary, but ask questions. Last week, when Erica Rudin, Loria, and Michael Haas spoke here, Michael talked about engaging our non-Jewish friends, and I have 2 questions for you. One is, what resources do you have, or what kinds of things can we do so that we can actively engage them? I know one example, I'm planning on going to Washington on Tuesday, and I had to reschedule a board meeting and send out a note saying I'm rescheduling. I'm going to DC for this march, and I'll send a longer letter following. And I did hear from one person on my board who's not Jewish who called to tell me part of the story, the rest of which he said he did not want either in email or over the phone in case anyone was listening. So, I haven't heard from other people, and I want to find a way to have that discussion. And then you also referred to reaching out to academic institutions. I'm an alumna of 2 that I think need to hear from me, and I'd like to find the right way to do it. One that I've heard from, I think they're struggling with the definition of anti-Semitism and the manifestation of anti-Semitism. So if you can talk a little bit about either direct us to resources or provide some advice before we leave, because it sounds like you're doing great stuff and we need to engage more with you.
So for campuses, if you go to adl.org, Stand With Israel, there's a list of campuses there where you can click and it's like one of those, like autofill letters where it's giving you all the content and it sends it right to your university leadership. And then if you don't see any of your alma maters listed, or maybe you see one and not the other, you can use the same draft language to send to leadership. So that's all available for you. And then there are a lot of resources there. We have the Workplace Pledge to Fight Anti-Semitism, where your workplaces or your friends or spouses' workplaces can commit to fighting anti-Semitism in the workplace. So that's an option. It's a great way to engage our non-Jewish friends. The Cleveland Cavaliers is a big part of that. American Eagle Outfitters is a part of that. So we have a lot of major organizations that do that, and small companies as well. And then several of those talking points, like how do I have a conversation with someone about the Israel-Palestinian conflict throughout history, not just what's happening right now, because sometimes people don't know. And just being able to have that conversation or say, hey, this is why this is impactful to me. Those, we've heard so many personal stories. Sometimes those are the pieces we don't share with people. And when they know that part of us and they see the reality of that connection, it makes more sense to them. It's not just a soundbite. It's not just a meme on social media. And I think that's a great way to engage.
Just to add on to that, the board member that I said I was with, exactly the same situation where they rescheduled a board meeting and they sent a note to people. It took about a day and he had 7 or 8 people who reached out. I'm happy to talk to you about what he said and how it came back, and also how you can broach that subject for the people who did not reach back out to you. Like ADL, we've got a multitude of resources. I'm happy to talk to you afterwards to point you in the right direction. And Rabbi Foster, maybe we can get you the links to some of the things that you can share. But also, if you let us know what campus, your colleges you're speaking about, we can also help to know what's being done and who the best person is for you to reach out to. Because while our action alerts are great, if you have that personal connection or you know who to go to, we can help you with the language that you need. We happen to have a guide that's an action plan for campus administrators, for professors, for so on and so on. So we're happy to get in touch with you.
Okay, we'll wrap up with Paul and Rose, and then I know if you're here, if anyone has anything to share or ask any questions. But yeah.
I've just got a general question for everybody here. How many of us have received calls from our non-Jewish friends, neighbors, and associates?
Expressing that they're siding with, that they feel sorry for what's going on in Israel. Yeah?
One of my coworkers didn't even know. When I asked him, he said he had no idea what was going on.
Okay.
He says he doesn't listen to the news.
That's a big problem.
All right, so thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for sharing. Thank you to Lisi and Kelly and all that your organizations are doing. Thank you, Rabbi Cohen and Rabbi Reis, for sharing from your experiences. And if you are here just a couple minutes, if anyone has anything to share or questions. Thank you all for joining us.